For nearly 3 centuries, the sight of a square-rigged longship emerging from the mist struck terror into the hearts of coastal communities across Europe. The Viking Raiders, seafaring warriors from Scandinavia, left an indelible mark on the medieval world between roughly 793 and 1066 AD. Yet to remember them only as bloodthirsty plunderers is to miss the fuller picture of a complex civilization that reshaped the political, cultural, and economic landscape of an entire continent. The Viking Age is traditionally dated from the raid on the monastery of Lindisfarne, a small island off the northeast coast of England, in 793 AD. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle recorded the event with horror, describing it as a visitation of divine wrath. For the monks who lived there, the attack was incomprehensible. Armed men arriving by sea, stripping the monastery of its gold, silver, and sacred relics, killing those who resisted, and disappearing back across the waves. Lindisfarne was not the first Scandinavian raid on foreign shores, but it was the one that announced to Christendom that a new and dangerous force had arrived. The raiders came from the lands we now know as Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, though these were not yet unified kingdoms in the modern sense. Scandinavia in the 8th century was a patchwork of petty kingdoms and chieftains, bound together by a shared language, mythology, and seafaring tradition. The reasons behind the sudden explosion of Viking activity outward from this region remain a matter of scholarly debate. Some historians point to population pressure and a scarcity of arable land. Others emphasize political instability at home, where younger sons of chieftains, unable to inherit, sought fortune abroad. Advances in shipbuilding technology certainly played a role, as the development of the keel and the flexible clinker-built hull gave the Norse access to open ocean routes that had previously been impossibly dangerous. Trade networks were also expanding, and the wealth of monasteries and poorly defended towns across Europe presented irresistible targets. The longship itself was the key to Viking success. These vessels were engineering marvels, shallow drafted enough to navigate rivers and estuaries, yet sturdy enough to cross the open North Atlantic. A typical longship could carry between 30 and 60 warriors and could be beached directly on a shoreline, allowing for lightning-fast raids with no need for a harbour. The speed and flexibility of these ships meant that Viking warbands could strike almost anywhere along a coastline, plunder a settlement, and vanish before any organised defence could be mounted. The initial pattern of raiding was opportunistic and seasonal. Small groups of warriors would set out in spring, raid through the summer months, and return home before winter. But as the 9th century progressed, the scale and ambition of Viking expeditions grew dramatically. What had begun as smash-and-grab raids on isolated monasteries evolved into organised military campaigns aimed at conquest and settlement. In 865, the so-called Great Heathen Army landed in England, not a raiding party, but a full invasion force intent on carving out permanent territory. Within a decade, they had conquered the kingdoms of Northumbria, East Anglia, and much of Mercia, establishing a region of Scandinavian control known as the Danelaw. Only the Kingdom of Wessex, under the leadership of Alfred the Great, survived as an independent English state. Similar patterns played out across Europe. In Francia, Viking fleets sailed up the Seine and besieged Paris in 845 and again in 885. The Frankish king Charles the Simple eventually granted the Viking leader Rollo a large territory in northern France in 911, which became the Duchy of Normandy, literally land of the Northmen. Norwegian Vikings colonized Iceland in the 9th century, established a short-lived settlement in Greenland, and even reached the shores of North America around 1000 AD, centuries before Columbus. Swedish Vikings, known as the Varangians, pushed eastward along the river systems of what is now Russia and Ukraine, establishing trade routes that stretched all the way to Constantinople and Baghdad. The violence of Viking raids should not be understated. Contemporary accounts, largely written by the monks and clerics who were their frequent victims, paint a picture of almost unimaginable brutality. Churches burned, relics destroyed, civilians enslaved. The slave trade was a central part of the Viking economy, and thousands of captives from Ireland, England, and the Slavic lands were sold in markets from Dublin to the Middle East. The very word slave in several European languages derives from Slav, a grim testament to the scale of human trafficking during this era. Yet the Vikings were far more than destroyers. They were also traders, explorers, craftspeople, and storytellers. The same seafaring skills that made them fearsome raiders also made them extraordinary merchants and navigators. Viking trade networks connected the frozen fjords of Norway to the bazaars of the Islamic world. Archaeologists have found Arabic silver coins in Scandinavian burial sites and Viking artifacts in locations as far-flung as Central Asia. The Norse were skilled metalworkers and woodcarvers, and their artistic traditions, characterized by intricate interlacing patterns and stylized animal motifs, influenced the decorative arts across Northern Europe. The cultural legacy of the Vikings is equally significant. The Norse sagas, composed in Iceland in the 13th century, but drawing on centuries of oral tradition, represent one of the great literary achievements of the medieval world. These sprawling narratives of feuds, voyages, and heroic deeds offer a window into a society that valued courage, loyalty, and a sharp wit. Norse mythology, with its pantheon of gods, including Odin, Thor, and Freya, continues to resonate in modern popular culture, from Tolkien's Middle-earth to contemporary films and television. By the 11th century, the Viking Age was drawing to a close. The Scandinavian homelands had consolidated into the recognizable kingdoms of Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. Christianity had largely replaced the Old Norse religion, and with it came new cultural norms that discouraged raiding. The descendants of Viking settlers in Normandy, England, Russia, and elsewhere had assimilated into local populations, blending their traditions with those of the communities they had once terrorized. The Viking raiders transformed the medieval world not merely through destruction, but through connection. They knit together distant regions of the globe through trade, migration, and cultural exchange. Their legacy endures in the place names of England, the legal traditions of Iceland, the genetic heritage of populations across Europe, and the enduring fascination with a people who, for a brief and tumultuous era, seemed to hold the fate of a continent in their hands.